Hello and welcome to Politics South East. Coming up in the next half hour, as the row over free school meals continues, we're joined by one MP putting pressure on his own government. Generation lockdown. We speak to the mothers who gave birth at the height of the pandemic.
It felt horrible because I was going through something painful. Obviously, I was aware that I was going to have a child. I knew it wasn't going to be easy and it was going to be painful. But I thought I'd at least have someone to hold my hand.
And calls for a radical redesign of mental health services for children in Sussex after a review found too many are waiting too long to get help. And joining us for the whole programme are the Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, Tim Loughton, and Labour's Karen Constantine, who represents Ramsgate on Kent County Council. Welcome to you both. There's a bit of a theme to this week's show, and we're going to start with free school meals, which has stirred up strong feelings here in the South East. It's a story that's still developing this morning, and our political editor, Lauren Moss, is here to talk us through. Good to have you back on the show, first of all, Lauren.
Thanks, Nathalie.
Let's chat about that vote in Parliament earlier this week.
Well, this was all brought about by Labour, and it follows on really from the campaign in the summer by Man United footballer Marcus Rashford to ensure free school meals continued through the summer holidays. Now, the government changed its mind on that, and they did continue, but then indicated that was it. The free school meals would cease in the holidays once the schools went back in England in September. Now, this week's vote wasn't binding anyway, but 5 Conservatives rebelled and voted for the meals to continue through the October half-term, including Eastbourne's Caroline Ansell, and she quit her government position as Parliamentary Private Secretary in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to do so. And a few other South East Conservatives abstained, so they didn't vote at all. Roger Gale, Tracy Crouch and Tim Loughton, who we'll be speaking to shortly. Now, Marcus Rashford's petition now has over 800,000 signatures. You've got 2,000 doctors calling for the government to do a U-turn on this, and a number of councils in the country, including Conservative ones, have said they will continue the free school meals next week, including Medway. Now, the government is responding to this. It says support is available, £9.3 billion. We're talking big numbers here going into welfare, £63 million for the local councils to support families that need it. And other councils like Kent County Council and East Sussex County Council say there are emergency maintenance assistance funds available and community hubs for people that need it. But you've got other organisations coming out all weekend like Crawley Town Football Club, Seaford Town and even individual schools now across Kent and Sussex saying they will be supplying free school meals through the school holidays. And all in all, if you look at the newspapers this morning, it makes quite uncomfortable reading for the government.
It's not gone away yet. It's half-term week for most schools. And Christmas holidays, Easter holidays are already looming. It's not going to go away, is it?
No, Labour's already saying that it will come forward again with another vote on this. It doesn't look like the government is shifting in its position. We're in recess now, so any other possible vote that does take place won't do so until after the October half-term. So then we're talking about the Christmas holidays. So you add in the connotations around Christmas time and winter time and free school meals on the Christmas holidays. That will make things increasingly complicated, I think.
Lauren, thank you for that summary. So let's talk to Tim first of all. So if I've understood you correctly, Tim Loughton, you do support the extension of free school meals, but you didn't vote for it last week because it was a Labour motion. Are you embarrassed that you're putting party politics before voting for school meals for deprived children?
No, and that's not at all what I've done. So I have said all along that I think we should continue the free school meal concession. Let's remember the government did this for Easter, for Whitsun and summer. No government, least alone any Labour government, has ever done that before. Given the unprecedented circumstances of the pandemic, I think we should continue that into next year. So I think the government got it wrong, and that's what I said, and I voted to abstain in this case, partly actually because I voted against the government 3 times already this week on the immigration bill, and I want to pick my fights. And frankly, I think
this wasn't a fight worth picking in your view, because Caroline Ansell obviously felt differently.
It is a fight worth picking, but I think, have much more influence by going back to the government to say, look, we have got to do this differently, by not just scattergun voting against the government all the time. I've said quite clearly, I think the government have got this wrong. It also, I think, takes away from all the other good stuff that has happened on welfare in this single, highly sort of emotive...
The trouble is, it's all backfired now. Doctors are stepping in this morning. Football clubs, as you've just heard from Lauren, local councils are doing the job that many feel the government should be doing. So do you think we will see a U-turn, thanks to the pressure you, among others, are putting on the government?
Well, I certainly hope so. Because we've had all this fallout, this is what some of us absolutely warn the government about. But despite all the additional money that's been going in for various welfare support measures, unprecedented amounts, there was always going to be a big row over free school meals. And once you start that entitlement, which the government did back in Easter, it's always going to be difficult when you turn off that tap. I understand why the government wants to turn off the tap. I think it's just the wrong timing for it.
One more quick question. If there is another vote brought by Labour in the next few weeks in Parliament, will you rebel against the government next time?
I will, yes. If there's another vote that says we need to bring the concession back for Christmas holidays, now I will vote for that. This wasn't a piece of legislation, though. This was purely a motion which had no effect. The government could have ignored it anyway.
Well, so you could have voted for it without any consequences.
If it has been a piece of legislation that would actually have had that impact, I would have voted for it.
Okay.
But it wasn't. This was a stunt by the Labour Party, quite shamelessly, but, you know.
Right, well, let's
surprise.
hear from the Labour Party. Tim Loughton, thanks very much for clearing things up. So, Karen, there you are, a stunt.
Well, I think that's a bit rich, isn't it, when you think about how badly wrong this has gone and how badly this is playing out for the government at the moment, where you've got literally everybody saying that this is a wrong-footed decision and it needs to be reversed. And why are they saying that? Because this is, in fact, the sixth richest nation on the planet, and there's no reason at all why our children should go hungry. And in fact, if we have hungry children, if we continue to stoke this bonfire of child poverty, then there are very, very long-term consequences which will be incredibly expensive to fix at some point in the future. And in Ramsgate, we've been dealing with child poverty now. It's been on the rise for a long time. It's almost doubled in Ramsgate, child poverty. And we've been taking steps to feed our children over the past 4 or 5 years, and it's getting worse. And it's got particularly bad since the introduction of universal credit, which is such poor rates that people are being forced into poverty. And we know now that the furlough scheme is going to come to an end, and that's going to push more people onto universal credit. And possibly...
Okay. Sorry to interrupt, but obviously getting back to this immediate issue of free school meals, you've talked about children going hungry. They're not, because as we've just heard, local councils, football teams across the southeast are stepping in. That's a good thing, isn't it?
It's a short-term measure for a crisis, in fact. You know, it will, you know, it's great. I mean, I've seen lots of companies in Ramsgate, Newington Fish Bar, they are providing fish and chip food for our children, and that's fantastic. I've seen the local head teacher of Newington Primary School come out and say this is a wrong decision, but this is a stopgap measure. We need a government that's focused on long-term planning, not only to reverse the tide of child poverty and child hunger, but also to carry us through this crisis and the looming crisis of Brexit. OK, I'm sure those children will be thrilled about the fish and chips. Karen, thank you very much. We're going to move on, because too many children with mental health problems in Sussex are experiencing unacceptable and unnecessary delays in getting the help they need. That's according to an independent report commissioned by local councils and the NHS. It recommends a radical redesign of a service which is leaving many people feeling disillusioned. People like Lorraine, whose son has been diagnosed with autism and PTSD. She shared her family's story with Radio Sussex.
If our children break a bone, it is fixed. If our children have something like autism and/or mental health problems, you wait and wait. Then you get a diagnosis and nothing. You ring in an emergency and very often get an answer machine. It can take days to get a call back. You manage to get an appointment. You get told no services to help, so medication dose goes up or it's changed. Families are left to fend for themselves with little or no support from anyone. Our children are left to get on with it.
We're going to get a Kent perspective on this now with the Maidstone GP, Dr. Zishan Sayed, who joins us now. Thanks for joining us this morning. Tell us what your experience as a GP is of children's mental health services in Kent.
Well, thank you for having me on. I mean, basically, as your speaker said before, unfortunately, there are profound difficulties in getting access to mental health acute services. For example, if a child is experiencing suicidal ideation and is on the verge of doing something like this, or if there's psychosis. So as a GP, you need to be able to access urgent mental health quickly. And we have something called a single point of access, but as your speaker said before, people are still left waiting. And then that risk is left to be managed by GPs in a primary care setting. Often the situation then arises where the person has to go to A&E as a place of safety under our advice, because we need something to be done to keep them safe. I think the other problem is also dreadful funding of primary care. We get paid £93.46 to manage a single patient in a whole year. You know, that's a paltry sum in 2020 to manage people's mental health care needs. So to put it another way, if that person were to contact the service 100 times in a year, we'd still get paid the same amount.
I see.
I would just point out that, you know, when we look at the literature like the Lancet, it points out that we have 4.5 psychiatrists per 100,000 young people in the UK, and that's lagging behind Europe. Finland has got 36, Estonia 16.8, Latvia 11.2.
So is it just from your perspective, you've talked a lot about money and about the number of psychiatrists, is it just about putting more money into the system, which we've heard many times on this programme before, or is there a problem with the way it's organised, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need to spend a lot of money, I assume?
Well, that's a good question, Nathalie. The issue is that unfortunately the work that secondary healthcare services should be doing, so for example, issuing specialist prescriptions, doing the relevant investigations, blood tests and ECG, these are things that they need to do when they're initiating patients on treatment. Unfortunately, despite given the funding by the government, they offload this work onto primary care services. So we've got very poor funding and we are doing the work that they should be doing. And it's because of this pressure, not just in mental health, but with other secondary care services, that primary care is crumbling. Some surgeries are shutting down because they cannot cope with the workload. And what we really need is we need the government to get tough. We need them to be actually issuing fines on services that aren't doing the work and are offloading the work onto hardworking GPs in surgery.
So, OK, that's an interesting thought. I mean, we're sure that that's quite a controversial one as well. Thanks very much, Dr. Zayed, for now. We'll come back to you in a moment. First of all, Tim Loughton, back to Sussex. How have things gone so wrong over the past 10 years there in particular?
Well, I'm afraid it's not just the last 10 years, Nathalie. We could have had this conversation 10 years ago. Mental health services have always been the poor relation within the National Health Service. And despite record amounts of money, and there should be an additional £2 billion coming into just to IAPT services, which is improving access to psychological therapies, as Dr. Sayed there said, which I thought was really interesting, I agree with everything he said, that money is not getting to the front line where it's needed. It's certainly not getting there earlier enough.
Why not?
And so the problem's been well, this is the question, because the problem is being dumped on GPs and on schools. And I'm getting a lot of complaints, and that's before the extra pressures we're getting through the pandemic at the moment, from schools who've got kids clearly with problems. They want to be able to refer them to mental health services at a low level to start with, and they're told that they don't meet the threshold, and so nothing's done. And of course, that problem then gets worse. The children become more problematic, and then later down the line will require more intense services, much more expensive, having had a big impact on them. And it's completely a false economy. So I completely agree with everything that Dr.
Well, it doesn't
Sayed
sound
said.
as though things are rosy in Kent, as we've just heard, but in in Sussex in particular, we have an acute problem. Brighton and Hove, for example, have come up with a better way of doing things. That's been widely acknowledged, whereas the rest of the South East, the rest of England, don't have children being admitted to hospital and dying of suicide at the same rate as they are in Sussex.
Well, the mental health services in Sussex are provided by the Partnership Trust across the whole of Sussex, and that includes Brighton and Hove as well. And we have problems across the whole of the country with high suicide
but they're
rate
much worse in Sussex.
And the pressures on young people through social media and everything else. What we need to do is to attack it much earlier. And that's why, as you know, I've been very involved, and we'll come on to the next item on this, with perinatal mental health and mental health problems affecting parents. And if you don't address that really early on, then those children will go on to school and have low-lying mental health problems, which then become more severe mental health problems, and at their very worst can then result in suicidal tendencies later on. So we should be doing far, far more upstream. I entirely acknowledge that.
OK, let's bring in Karen. I mean, these individuals have complex needs. The system is very complex. It's not just about putting more money in, is it?
I think it is about more money in the system, actually. I think it is. I think we do need more services for young people. I mean, we saw in 2017-18 an 18% increase in the number of referrals. We've seen recent survey which says 80% of young people are experiencing exacerbated mental health problems because of the pandemic, and 31% don't get the support that they need. It's very difficult getting this support. This is something that we saw in Ramsgate 3 or 4 years ago, and we had to call public meetings because we did have a real crisis on our hands with regard to young people going through suicide ideation. But again, I have spoken to psychiatrists and I've spoken to service managers, and they say the same thing, that it's a really difficult job to do because they can't give the time and attention to young people that they actually want to give. And I think what we've got here is we've got the Conservative government again stoking a perfect storm. So we've got poverty in the mix. We know where we've got poverty. We get exacerbated mental health problems, both for children and for the families. We know if we cut services, then those problems only grow. So again, I would say we're stoking up a huge problem for the future. And what we need to do is put more services in and make these services much more simple to access.
OK, Karen, thank you. Let's go back to Dr. Zayed. What do you make of what you've just heard from the two politicians we have on the show? They both agree with everything you said.
Yes, well, as was also said, that we could be having this conversation 10 years ago. I think that's very sad. It shows that we know what the problems are, but nothing seems to be actually being actioned on the front line to help. And that's really what I would like to emphasise. I mean, we're in the background of COVID. And I think actually, from my perspective, COVID has highlighted that actually all is not well in the NHS. It hasn't been well for a long time. And I'd advise your listeners to look at things like what we did in locally in Kent. We've got the LMC. If you go on their website, Kent LMC Workload Survey, you'll see that for a long time, lots of work done by secondary care. It's being passed on to primary care.
Yeah. Now I'm sorry to cut you short. You've given us a really powerful account of what it's like from your end. We're really grateful to you, Dr. Zayed, for coming on the programme. If we've been talking about it for the last 10 years, I'm sure we'll be talking about it again before too long. Now, becoming a mother for the first time can be daunting at the best of times, but throw in a pandemic and it's a whole other ballgame. Thousands of new mums across the South East have had to start motherhood in the last few months without visits from health visitors or from their close friends and family. We've spoken to two of them, one from Brighton, one from Haywards Heath, and they've told us their experiences of giving birth in lockdown.
It was just terrifying. It was just something that I don't think any new mum needs the additional stress of worrying about a pandemic at the same time as having a baby. Not seeing the health visitor and her asking me on the phone, like, is she growing okay? I don't know. I have no idea. It turns out she wasn't. She was too small. It was just constant source of anxiety. Like, is she okay? Is this normal? I understand that the health visitors have been reassigned to do COVID testing, a lot of them. So I know that they're overstrained, but I just don't think that's good enough, really. Like, I could text my health visitor saying, is this okay? Is she okay? And I'll hear back from her a month later. So it's like, well, the rash has gone by now. Next time. I think I had so many expectations. Like, I was planning on taking her to swimming lessons as soon as she turned 6 weeks old, and we're going to go to all these baby groups and make loads of baby friends, and like all my friends and family were going to be around her, and it just didn't happen, and you can't ever get that back, and especially for your first child, you can never have your first child again.
For the first 17 hours that I was in hospital until they broke my waters, I was by myself. It felt horrible because I was going through something painful. Obviously, I was aware that I was going to have a child. I knew it wasn't going to be easy and it was going to be painful. But I thought I'd at least have someone to hold my hand. And my husband actually wasn't with me until they broke my waters. Then he was allowed to be with me. And he was there for about an hour or so after her birth. And then that was about it. So it was very upsetting. I think it's very hard to instantly love a being that you don't know as a person, and obviously throw COVID on top of that, and the fact that I had a difficult labour and then I had a C-section, which is quite major surgery. So coming to terms with that and trying to obviously raise a tiny human, it's very hard to kind of then think about yourself. And most of the time you get asked, oh, how's baby doing? But sometimes I think you need to ask, oh, mum, how are you doing? Obviously with COVID, it's a struggle to actually want to get that support because you're so anxious about going out and possibly contracting it, and you don't know what's safe, where's safe. It's kind of instilled into you that you're probably better off by yourself at home.
Hello everyone, it's really good to see you. Any woman who has given birth since March deserves a medal, frankly, for just having done that, particularly with some of the restrictions that have been put on them. Certainly the mums who've accessed our groups all say that this has been a lifeline for them because they've actually had the chance to connect with someone else and talk about what it's like for them. Mothers Uncovered, we offer peer support. We're not trained medics. It's all about listening to the woman's experience with motherhood, about valuing her, because I think motherhood is not valued in our society. Women are told to just well, you've had the baby's okay, just put up and shut up and get on with it. We know it's very serious for some people. But there needs to be more research put into the risks and the risks of excluding people from connecting with each other versus the health risk of potentially getting COVID.
I was walking down the road and I do get that you have to take precautions, but I think the priorities are wrong. We're prioritising COVID above everything else when it's not more important than parental bonding and parental mental health and baby socialisation. There's a lot of things that should be more important, especially since it's not going anywhere.
Now, this is Tim's area of expertise, as he said earlier. We're going to go to Karen first, though, on this. Karen, at the end of the day, the government had to make quick decisions, didn't they? The NHS had to move fast to cope with rising numbers of COVID cases and a shortage of PPE. Those staff health visitors were needed on the front line, and also visiting lots of homes without the right protective equipment would have been dangerous.
Well, I can understand how they felt and how they were worried about that. But again, I would go back to what's happened in the NHS over the past 10 years. And we've seen a loss of 100,000 staff, including many, many midwives. We know that midwives are going back into work carrying £41,000 worth of debt. So we know that we've actually put the brakes on recruitment and retention in midwifery and in health visitors. It takes 5 to 6 years to train somebody up. So we really do need to make progress. And I think that's at the bottom of this, that there just aren't enough qualified staff to go around.
OK, so given all that, if you'd been in government at the start of the pandemic, what should have been done differently?
I think the protections that were applied to staff because of the lack of PPE were probably quite correct. However, coming out of lockdown, what women reported was in 3/4 of the trusts across the country that their partners weren't allowed in with them for birthing and their partners weren't allowed in with them for scans. And that's obviously hugely detrimental because birth is obviously usually quite difficult and quite painful, and you need your partner there. And also scans at 12 and 20 weeks. That's where you are. If you're going to get bad news, that's most likely where that's going to happen. And you need your partner alongside of you. The reason being, 1 in 4 births are traumatic, and we know this either physically or psychologically.
Okay.
And we know that it has a profound effect on mental health going forward for mother and child.
Let's bring in Tim, because you raised the issue in Parliament this week, Tim. Has your party failed those newborn babies and their new parents, mums and dads?
Let me just make it clear. My area of expertise in this is not as a new mum, but it is an area I've had.
Thanks for that clarification.
As a former children's minister, and I chair the all-party group for 1001 Critical Days, which is all about that time from conception to age 2, which is the most impressionable on a new baby. There's several problems here, Natalie, and this isn't a political thing. And okay, Karen can throw around all sorts of figures. The coalition government actually recruited 4,200 additional health visitors, fantastically valuable. And we've lost quite a few of those since responsibility was given over to local authorities, which I very much regret. And it's the wrong investment. We need to get those back. But also, I think that hospitals and others have been overly cautious here. Of course, we need partners with mums all the way through the pregnancy and at birth. I just had an email this morning from a dad whose partner was rushed into hospital and had a premature birth, and he wasn't allowed to be there. That's completely unacceptable. It's not a government decision. That's entirely a local matter for hospitals. But there's a bigger problem here as well, in that new mums, particularly first-time mums, haven't been able to mix with other mums and other babies. In many cases, they haven't had that extended family support of, mums and fathers and mother-in-laws and everybody coming around to help because of restrictions on social mixing. And that really matters. I was talking to a colleague of ours who's on maternity leave at the moment, and she hasn't been able to go to baby groups. And she said that the first time her baby saw another baby, she actually recoiled because she wasn't used to that sort of contact. Now, that's really worrying, and that's why we should do more to make sure we get those babies and mums and all that experience.
Should babies be included in the rule of 6 as they are in Scotland?
No, they shouldn't. Children, I said that primary school age children and below shouldn't count in the rule of 6. They are very, very low risk on COVID and low risk carriers as well. So that makes no sense. And the impact of not having that experience and the loving relations around going goo at new babies and everything is really, really valuable. So it's not helpful. And the impact on new parents' mental health as well, particularly if you're a new single mum as well. You need all those support networks, being able to access those new baby classes and everything else as well. So that's why we've said that we've come up with in our report some ideas for a parent-infant premium and a baby boost, and getting those babies back meeting other babies and getting the health visitors back dealing face to face. And
hopefully not recoiling at the sight of each other, Tim. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's just bring in Karen for a final thought. I mean, if Labour's suggestion of a circuit break was introduced, that would make all these situations even worse for newborn babies and their mums, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily, because what we're talking about is what trusts do for in maternity processes, and that's quite separate. So I'm saying very clearly that women should be allowed to have their partners at birth and at scans. And I've certainly spoke to many women whose partners have played the hokey-cokey in the room, out of the room, and so on. Okay. What we're looking at here is a pandemic that has uncovered the flaws in the NHS that the Conservative government have.
OK, Karen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks, Tim and Karen, for joining us. That's all we've got time for. We're going to be back next Sunday. I hope you can join us then. Until then, have a very good week. Bye-bye.